Hello, everyone. I see already 15 participants. Hello, welcome to our webinar. Okay. Okay, cool. So we may start. Can you properly hear me, Emric? Cool. Perfect. So welcome everyone to this new webinar. Thank you all for spending your time with us. Before starting, I would like to clarify that you can always feel free to put any question that you may have in the chat. We will read these questions at the end of the presentation of each speaker. So today the topic will be quality feedbacks from notified body audits and technical assessment, or benchmark or best practices. So the speakers will be Emeric Levon, MedTech Commercial Director in Product Life Group, and Eileen Dirben, Medical Device Team Leader at Spires, Product Life Group company. So please.
Hi everyone. So to introduce the agenda of today, we will first focus on the feedback we can directly have from notified body audits on more of QMS process, I would say. Then we are going to see how it impacts directly some operations. So basically how it impacts your relation with the notified body since the implementation of the new regulation. We will see a few complementary QMS findings that you can have from that. And then we will see how a technical assessment from your technical documentation can generate new findings that are also related to your processes. So basically, we are trying to cover all the findings that may impact your process, quality process, but from different inputs. So as Fernando told you, do not hesitate to ask any question if you want on the chat, and I answer after my part, and exactly the same from Eileen. So first, we are going to move to this systematic QMS review. Basically, one element is you may know that since the new regulation, the Article 10 is giving us for a legal manufacturer all the minimum process we need to have in place and the related requirements. So from regulatory compliance to UDI, post-market activity, CAPA management, communication with external parties, clinical evaluation. And the first element was, okay, if I am having a look on this QMS requirements, which process have been impacted by this new regulation? Because we know that some of this process, we already have them in the ISO 13485 and certification related to this ISO, but which one have been highly impacted? And in fact, when I did this mapping, I discovered that all the processes have been impacted in a way or another, but all the processes have new requirements, new way to interpret those requirements, new ways that new state of the art, maybe some notified body are requiring for you to implement those processes. So basically, we are going to try to deep dive into the different processes and to show you the point of attention, the attention point. First of all, just to have a quick reminder on the findings we are going to discuss on the main elements of the QMS that will be important. It is from where your findings can come from. We usually have the planned QMS audit. We also have, since very few months, I would say, findings coming from the technical documentation review, because it can generate findings that impact your QMS. You will have, and it was something common, an announced audit, but you will have to under this an announced audit at least once per certification cycle. And something that have been straightened with the new regulation, it's microbiology and sterilization specific audits. We could also have some types of device testing depending on the regulation pathway you decided to fulfill. So basically right now we have all these four sources of input to generate findings. It is important to always keep that in mind. I wanted to start with the corrective action and preventive action process because usually this is something that it is not evolving a lot. It is something well established. We know it since many previous versions of the ISO 13485, and we did not see a lot of new evolution. But I was thinking that until yesterday or the day before, until we have this new NDCG 2024 12, because it has been released more for notified bodies on their way how to manage CAPA to respond to the non-conformities they can have from an audit, from inspection, from health authorities or joint assessment team. But basically, we know that since we have this type of NDCG, indirectly, the notified body are going to translate their own requirements to the requirements they apply for the legal manufacturer. So it is always interesting to have a look on it. What it is important, since we are putting in the center that CAPA is a systematic approach and a systemic approach. We are going to have a look on a system and not on individual case or individual person. Then we have a strong differentiation between corrective and preventive action. I'm going to show you an example. This leads to, for you, have an extended impact investigation and analysis from a non-conformity. You have to really deeply identify what can be correlated to your non-conformity. For example, if we identify, I don't know, a deficiency in the validation process, let's consider your direct root cause is a lack of in-depth knowledge of the sterilization method, maybe by the author of the procedure. So basically, he has a lack of knowledge and the procedure is not fully accurate. The thing is, if I am pushing a little bit further the investigation, the idea would be, okay, what are the procedures? And maybe the procedure related to validation that have been redacted by this same author and that I could have the same problem of in-depth knowledge. So basically here we are more what this NDCJ is calling preventive action, because the idea is I prevent on other processes to have the same issue, to have the same non-conformity. So this is something interesting because it confirms we need to have an extended impact investigation. Basically, why it is putting that is because we have four main steps that have been really introduced. The first one is problem identification, then non-conformity. We have then the identification of the direct cause or causes, but then we have the root causes. It is all the related potential channel of causes that can have been implemented to generate this direct cause. And all that with a focus on the system and not on an individual. Another element who is really interesting, I just copy-paste, to be honest, the table that it is in this MDCG, is we already knew that we have a specific approach to try to manage this non-conformity from notified bodies. The first is to see, okay, do I have a procedure? Is my procedure robust enough here? And if it's not, is the person who performs the activity enough trained, enough qualified? And then to try to implement your action. But basically here we have some additional element. You are going to see that to identify some specific action related to the evaluation of the procedure, for example. You will have also some additional element to identify if you have some personal related issues, for example, from voluntarily to involuntarily issues, qualification, experience, etc. We will have still some element related to the training, and we had something new because it was something we were not highlighting a lot before. It's the management related issue. Did I have enough control on the activity if it is a critical activity? It could be direct control, it could be supervision, it could be global policies, allocation of resources for the activities. So it is a really interesting point of view we have here. And definitely, I think in the coming months, you will have to take into account all these type of questions and to be able to see and to show that you took them into account because you can be challenged on it. Definitely, this is something I really think about. And it is something really new. I will move to the risk management process. The main thing we see on a pure QMS point of view is that sometimes the risk analysis is really focused on your product, and the process risk analysis is forgotten. So usually it is findings. In fact, it's because as a global entity, you have a full QMS with different process from management review, HR management, infrastructure management, and here you have to have a global risk management. So first, this is a thing that you need to have both this risk management file. This leads me to focus on the product risk management. What are the main elements that could be missing? First, you need to have a full risk management file. This full risk with all the elements required by the ISO 14971. Then always remember that even if we have an ISO standard supporting the risk management analysis and management process for product, we have some discrepancies between the requirements of the ISO and the MDR, or IVDR. So basically, take care about that. For example, the main element is reduce the risk as further as possible, and it's not stated like that in the ISO. So have a look on that. Usually, it is the Z annex, and it is important to take. The second element is remember that the new regulation is also having introduced a new ISO standard, the 31,000 ISO standard. It is related to the 14971, but there is a more global point of view, and it's introducing opportunities. So basically, it is giving you a standard approach for a specific situation to have an opening to the risk and also to the benefits. So it's really implementing something that you will be able to use for risk benefits ratio evaluation. Related to this ISO standard, we're not using it a lot in the field of health and specifically in the medical device field, but it is used in many other, I would say, industrial fields. So keep that in mind. Then sometimes we're forgetting that the risk analysis should be a real dynamic process. One element to show this dynamic is the PMS. When you are doing your post-market surveillance activities, you are generating data that really can directly impact your risk analysis. And you have really to be able to show in your process, what did you plan as a specific measure to make this relation between the output of your PMS and how it impacts your risk analysis, and at the same time, the record related to the implementation of this process. Another element I already introduced in the previous webinar is how to manage probability of occurrence of an hazard related to your risk and criticity too. Basically, it is something we see a lot that are challenged by the notified bodies. It is to adapt the occurrence, the probability of occurrence of an hazard to your real situation. How many products are you introducing into the market? How many devices you have on the market? For example, if you have the active device that have been put in place and active on the device on the market for 3 years, for example, how many products are still effective? And the second one could be how frequently are you doing some operation per year? And basically, it's going to give you a range of, I would say, number. If I am just introducing, let's see, but if we are introducing, I don't know, 10 million, sorry, products over year into the market, it's not the same thing as if I have small batches of product with only 1,000 products each year, for example. And we will have a particularly critical point when you are provider of consumables, because you can have a really big amount of product introduced into the market. So going to 1/1 million probability is totally something possible each year. And if you are introducing 10 million, it's meaning that the risk can occur 10 times a year. And the second thing is, if you have some product like software, basically you have just one software. So take into account that it will be important to focus on the number of operation, on the number of times the product is operating, to calculate your frequency, your probability of occurrence. The same could be applied to the criticality. If you have a product that never could be involved in the death of someone, maybe it's not appropriate to introduce death into your criticality scale to evaluate your risk, your product risk analysis. So basically, it is something important. In the figure, I just wanted to introduce a small element important for the ones attending today who are developing and commercializing softwares, is the difference between the safety risk, the security risk, and what we are going to try to focus on during the risk analysis is the security risk with an impact on the safety. It is something really important to have in mind, because sometimes we cannot see this difference and convergence of the safety and the security risk, and it could lead to some findings. If I move to the human resources, something important here we see a lot is your ability to demonstrate competencies, capacities, skills of the person directly involved in a critical function with a critical impact on the product. It could be on design and development, for example, on biocompatibility, clinical evaluation, process validation, production. It could be also on post-market activities, complaint management, vigilance, assessment, and for sure, your person responsible for regulatory and compliance. Usually what it is missing is some discrepancies in the maintenance of HR files with all the proof of backgrounds, appropriate experience, and periodic, regular, frequently training to keep this competence and to stay updated with the regulation. It is really important, and this is something we see. So do not focus on the elements that are PRC and clinical evaluation. Have a look little bit wider on other processes that can have an impact, and people who are going to validate the document that has a record generated through this process. About product, I wanted to focus on two elements. The first one is we see that we may have some non-conformities related to the validation of special processes. And sometimes we could have some non-conformities related to the product verification process. I put these two type of non-conformity together because we see the same type of missing information. The first thing is we really need a different protocol, a protocol really different from the report. In the protocol, we have some different elements from the report. So always have in mind protocol report. The statistic approach is really important here. It was not so much important during the old directive, but right now, yes. And one main element is, can you justify your sample size? If you want to validate your process, if you want to verify your product, how many products did you use? How many repetitions did you do, and why? What is your sample size? Mainly for establishing your protocol, what will be your acceptance criteria? It is important to define before doing the testing or the validation, what will be your acceptance criteria? And if you are not fulfilling them, what is the impact? Always something important when you are doing especially the validation process is to ensure all the equipment have been qualified, and if necessary, if you are doing some measurement, all the measures are done with equipment related to national standards. It is really important. Here, as I told you before, competencies of the people in charge of this activity are checked, as well as if there is some standard, mainly ISO standards that could be state of the art, for example, you have to demonstrate your compliance or justify why you are not following those standards. Just one element, sometimes we can take what I call some shortcut. For example, for sterilization, we can use sometimes a specific biological indicators because we know they are recognized as worst case for specific sterilization methods. You really have to justify why you are doing that because you are not following fully the ISO standard that it is a state of the art. And so basically this is something when you are establishing your procedure, I would recommend you to introduce that. Each time you decided not to fully follow the standard, you have to justify it. And for sure, consider that the end of your process will be to establish the frequency of revalidation of your process. And another important thing is, do I need to establish periodic inspection on the product generated by this process? We see many findings about traceability. So, traceability is at each stage of the production process from raw materials, being able to identify from which batches, which references of the raw material until the finished product with intermediate products. So it's really important to have this full traceability all over your bone. Something that it will be we are going to discuss later with Eileen is the change management, specifically on production process. It is really important to have a real, that your change management process takes that into consideration. You cannot make some evolution of your production process without evaluating the impact. If I move to some post-market activities, this gives me the opportunity to tell you here, I am going to give you some elements. It is an introduction. because the 29th of October, we are going to have a specific dedicated webinar to all the post-market activities and how to fully implement them, really the how to do. So here I'm more going to focus on what we can see on a process point of view. The first element is complaint and vigilance. On a process point of view, the discrepancies, the findings are, how do you differentiate complaints and vigilance? How do you identify vigilances? And then how do you establish process that ensure that you are able to do the vigilance reporting inside the deadlines that have been imposed by the new regulation? Because if you have some, I don't know, some suppliers and you are giving them some times to report you and a complaint, then you have your own time to record it, then you have your own time to evaluate it. Maybe you are going to go over the 2 days of reporting that timelines to report some vigilance. And basically, this is something we see a lot during the audits. Then you have the PSUR, so the periodic safety update reports. When we see some elements of findings, first is to really clarify with almost like what we call a CPOC, supplier input, process output, and customer, how we can manage this process. What are the input data? We need to identify them. How are we going to process them and analyze them? What it is our analysis process. Then to which type of endpoint, KPI, threshold, those data are going to lead. And how am I implementing my threshold? Why I'm going to decide some specific threshold? And what are my strategy to manage any data that are showing that I'm going over my threshold? Is it an awareness threshold? Is it an action threshold? But it is really important to having that in mind, because you need to be able to show your strategy. If I am going over this threshold, I will generate a report to the health authority. Or if I am just going over the first awareness threshold, I am setting up some specific action. And if it's going over the other threshold, it is my action threshold, I will have to inform the authority and then maybe have some other one. Other elements really important, but maybe you already know it. For this PSUR, depending on the class of your device, you need to have it updated with a specific frequency. For class 2A, it's different from class 2B and class 3. At the same time, and we are going to really deep dive on it the 29th, you will have to implement some PMCF. PMCF, in fact, and other systemic proactive data collection. It is really important for you to integrate into your PMS process that led to the generation of PSUR, but also how are you going to collect proactively some data. On clinical evaluation, the main element we can see on a pure process point of view. The first element is sometimes the literature review is not standardized. It's not clear which methodologies, and technical aspect you are using to do this literature review. So here it is important to describe the full process into procedures. Then in your process, it is important to focus on some considerations. The first one is your intended purpose and the element related to the medical device use. It was not described as much as before. It was not required to describe it as much as it is right now since the MDR. The context of use environment, users, patients, patient conditions, all these elements are really important. And in your procedures, it is important to standardize all those elements that are mandatory to be integrated into your clinical evaluation. Another element is that your clinical evaluation should be focused on the fact that related to your claims, you will have some clinical benefits and you need to demonstrate them. So basically, the objective of demonstration should be in the center of your process. And this is something you may be really challenged in. It is, how can I define some clinical benefits? How are they measurable? How frequently can I measure them? How, etc. So this is the element for your clinical evaluation process. For the technical documentation, this is a new process. In fact, we did not have in the ISO 13485. We had DHR, sorry, but we did not have technical documentation properly. This is introducing some new records, regulatory strategy, clinical development plan. Some others Elaine is going to talk to you about. And we also have some new SOPs, some procedure you will need to raise. Maintenance of your technical documentation. How do you redact your technical documentation? How do you maintain it? How are you going to review it before transmitting it? If you have any request for submission by any health authority, for example, this is important. And some SOPs related to all the interaction you may have with the competent authorities. For example, for this prompt response to some request. I wanted just to highlight an element we see a lot during the audits is how do you manage records from external provenance. Basically, it is an ISO 13485 requirement, but it has been extended due to the new regulation because it could include test reports. So how are you going to manage those test reports? And a related element is sometimes you are using some service providers to do some testing, for example, and they could be on another state, country than you are located. So the report could be raised in a different language from your one. How are you doing this translation? It is really important because you can be challenged not only for the content, but also for the translation. How is it possible that you as a legal manufacturer are able to understand what it is into this test report if you doesn't speak the language? This is important. So you will have to demonstrate the skills of the person who is doing the translation. So remind that it is important when you will have to establish your procedure for the record management, when you have some external records, including this test report and it implying translation, it is important not only to manage the reference and how to identify properly and store properly, etc., this external record, but also how I am going to use it properly. And this leads me to give the floor to Eileen, who is going to talk to you about first the relation between the legal manufacturer and the notified body.
Yeah, thank you very much, Emmerich. So let's get started directly. And then it's essential, of course, to have a good relationship with the notified body. And you may think like, okay, but with the MDD, I had a really good relationship. Common practices were shared by the notified body. They even gave me advices, and step by step, I was improving the quality, safety, and/or the performance of the devices. And then with the MDR, it became quite quiet. We have seen that too, unfortunately. But also in defense of the notified bodies, they also needed to dive into this new regulation, as well as that there was a lot ongoing to have their designation for the MDR as well. But notified bodies are making some progress, some steps, because they also see that they need to have this good relationship again, and therefore you can make use of the project management. But they also introduced something new, which is called structured dialogue. In this case, the structure is really coming from the legal manufacturer. So they need to organize everything very well and present it in a good way. And then they can ask if they are on the good track, yes or no. Basically, the notified body will answer it with just a yes or just a no. They're not going to explain a lot, unfortunately. Yeah, you may think that maybe with the FDA it's different. Indeed, they give more explanation, but it's a start, and it's a good start to have that relationship build up. And then in particular, it might be useful, of course, for devices with novel aspects, as well as if you're making a lot use of consultants and you're not able to verify because of capacity and or the knowledge, if what they are doing is a good way, then you could consider this structured dialogue before you submit your technical documentation, and then find out that maybe you had to do a different pathway. Then before you are submitting or to get your interaction ongoing, of course, you need to select a notified body. This will still go via the NENDO website, whereby you can make use of the applicable MDA MDN code, which is reflecting the intended purpose of your device. Then there are some options to include as well. This might be in horizontal code, but you can also think about your preferred conformity assessment route, as well as that maybe you need to think about, okay, but I also have some interest in the UK. Not all notified bodies will support that, or some other regulation, whereby especially I think for software, the Artificial Intelligence Act might be relevant, that they can assess that directly too, instead of going to a separate party. Once you have selected your notified body, you have to fill in the application form. And hereby it's important to keep in mind that you have to give them a good overview of your device, so they can also verify if you indeed did your classification correctly. So it's better to share a little bit more about your device and the characteristics, instead of sharing less and then back and forth or wording with the application form. Then ultimately that will result in a quotation and a contract, and it's good to have a look at the proposed package offered by the notified body. Some have a little bit more project management already included in the quotation, while for others they just present their hour rate. And then if you want that interaction, or you think, okay, I may need a little bit more interaction, you pay for it all separately. This process will take up for about 2 to 6 months in general. And then thereafter, the review processes will be starting. And the review processes, which are on the next slides, consist of the assessment of the quality management system, as well as the assessment of the technical documentation. Emmerich already showed lots of aspects of the quality management system. He was presenting it in relation to the Article 10 of the MDR, and here I've chosen to present it more in relation to the ISO 13485. Luckily, there's a lot of overlap, so we see a lot coming back to. So that's nice. And I fully agree that also the product surveillance, of course, there's a lot impacted with the medical device regulation. Then when we go to the assessment of the technical documentation, the build-up of the dossier is presented in Annex 2 and 3 of the MDR, and also depicted here very shortly. As you can see, I didn't make a separate one for the post-market processes, because in the end of the day, it will also fall on the product verification and validation, which consists of the pre or non-clinical data, as well as the clinical data. For pre-non-clinical data, you may need to think, but it's dependent of your device, about software validation, electrical safety, biological evaluation, usability engineering. And then obviously for the clinical data, you go for your clinical evaluation and clinical investigation. And then let's share some experiences with the notified bodies. First of all, related to some of the QMS findings, Emmerich already also told a lot, so I want to keep it a little bit shorter to have all time available for the technical documentation findings. But it is interesting to mention that we see that some of our customers get a non-conformity because there is a process lacking if in case the business goes bankrupt or the activities will stop. This is specifically specified for the full QMS route. So it's a little bit dependent if you are following that route. But it's good to think about it and also to have that process really in place, although hopefully it will not happen. Then it is important that the strategy for regulatory compliance is really written on paper and not in people's heads, which often occurs, unfortunately. Then a lot of companies have been collecting more clinical data via also clinical investigations, but you should follow procedures for this. And you should think about it upfront and not thinking, oh, now I've got a serious adverse event coming from a clinical investigation, but I've no idea how to report it. Yeah, that's usually not the way of doing it. Further, you of course see some verification of the manufacturing process, whereby they actually verify if what you have been written in your technical documentation is indeed in line with reality. Also, in case you're making use of outsourced partners, then they will have some attention to how you control these parties. And in case it's the full manufacturing process, they may visit the other partner as well. So that's important to keep in mind. Then we see that there's quite some effort done related to the post-market systems, which is great. However, we also noticing that not everybody is as trained yet, and therefore the follow-up on this post-market systems may be lacking or may not be going totally according to the updated procedure anymore. Then there are also some general aspects which are maybe more related to the ISO 13485 instead of necessarily to the medical device regulation. Emmerich also already taught the first one, so indeed the difference between corrective and preventive actions, but also we see sometimes misunderstanding what's a non-conformity versus what's a complaint. Further, everybody has this quality policy, but the implementation of the quality policy is often unfortunately lacking. Then the involvement of the top management, sometimes they're not always aware that they actually are involved, but it's good to keep them involved, of course. Then I think Emmerich already mentioned the competence of the personnel is really about the documentation and not necessarily that they're not competent. And then if you're making use of software tools, then please ensure that they might need to be validated as well. And then we can move on to technical documentation. And let's start with the fact that after you submitted your full technical documentation to the notified body, then there will be a completeness check, which will be done in the first week up to the first month after submission. And they will check whether you indeed provided the full technical documentation according to your cover letter and or according to an own created checklist, which is basically in line with this position paper as well. So therefore, I've been adding that. And then we are noticing that quite often there has been reported that not all clinical articles are shared, or there's a declaration of interest listing. There might be a CV missing of the clinical evaluators as well as of the biological evaluators. We see that especially related to the additional information on the product verification and validation, which are, for instance, the additional requirement for using animal tissue, or if you have a medicinal substance, or in case you have a substance-based device and you need to address the absorptive capacity. But also in cases where there is a measuring function, or that it is provided in sterile condition, or you have a reusable surgical instrument. For those, there are additional requirements, and those needs to be addressed. I've seen sometimes that it might have been fully be prepared, but and referenced as well, but simply not included when the technical documentation needs to be provided. So keep that in mind. And then when you are providing reports, often they also want to see protocols. Emmerich was also already addressing it, and I'm addressing it too. Only providing reports might not be sufficient. They also want to see the protocol. So keep that in mind. And then the technical documentation assessment can be starting up. Usually there's a technical documentation specialist involved, as well as there might be involvement of a clinical expert and a microbiological expert. There might be some more experts. It's usually also coming back in the quotation already, so you can verify what they think is needed. They will do a maximum of 3 round systems. It can be that they provide everything in once and in one document, but we have also seen it happening that the clinical evaluator and or the microbiological expert are not directly involved in the first round, but that they will start on later, or that they even provide it in a separate document. So usually the flexibility with the other experts is quite good, and also you can close it usually in 1 or 2 rounds instead of the full 3 rounds. Well, the technical documentation specialist, usually they go just for 3 rounds, which is also the maximum. Then for the technical documentation specialist, you see that there's a lot of focus on the risk management. What we see is that they really check, okay, did you include all the life cycle phases, and are they coming back in the risk assessment too? If there are any doubts, they will definitely raise it. Then when you're using a quantitative risk score, so a more measurable function, then you may need to demonstrate that your probability score is indeed in line with the available post-market and or clinical data. So you may need to do the calculation to show indeed that it's all correctly scored, hopefully. And then also what we have been noticing is that there is a lot of verification on reported clinical post-market surveillance and reported literature safety concerns, and whether you can find them back really in the risk management. So if there has been reported that it often results in pain, then they also want to see in the risk assessment that pain is coming back as a hazard, or at least as a reported concern. So that check will often be done. Then we see a lot of focus on compatibility with other products or between the components, and whether this is really addressed in the risk assessment. So keep that in mind. Then maybe not so much related to the technical documentation, or I'm not yet fully convinced. But often we see requests for the risk management procedure, risk management policy, and or the risk management review. And this last aspect is of course new in the latest ISO 14971, and therefore included. And then, although it might be perfectly included already in your risk management plan, often they ask for some kind of additional clarification of the frequency of the risk review, which is also specifically addressed in the reference section of the ISO TR related to the 14971. And then when we continue with the technical documentation specialist, There are some more general remarks, and that's that there might be some inconsistencies with just some general device aspects within your technical documentation, and therefore not fully matching with the device description and specification. So alignment is really relevant and also key for understanding by the auditor to understand really your device. Then it might be that they are going specifically asking, oh, what are the design stages? If you don't have them applied, then you just have to mention that very honestly, which may also be sufficient. It can also be, we often see also requests for design traceability matrix, which consists of this user needs, design input, design output verification and validation. Then as well, we see that you have to give exact locations also of your suppliers. And if you may use suppliers, then it might be that you need to clarify that a little bit more. Then if you claim compliance to the usability engineering standard, then often they think, oh, then you should have also a usability testing report, which is not always the case, because sometimes you can also make a usability a justification and still you may fulfill the usability engineering standard. But sometimes this is not fully understood yet. Then related, we see quite some focus on the transport packaging and or the transport validation testing, whether that's performed. So does your device remain stable also after transport? Then for specifically the biological evaluation, they may challenge your contact duration or where it is in contact with. And also if you don't have performed all the tests, which is definitely not always needed, they may challenge your endpoint rationales. Sometimes we see a request for a margin of safety calculation. And I think Emmerich already addressed it, justification for sample sizes, and also to have the measured acceptance criteria already mentioned in the protocols. That's essential. And that's also what we see coming back a lot. Then when we move on to the clinical expert, we see specifically indeed, and I think Emmerich already mentioned it, that there are quite some concerns related to literature search. Since he already mentioned, I just move on to the next one, and that's about the measurable objectives. So in case you're doing a new clinical investigation, you probably have been emphasizing, okay, these are the endpoints and this is what I accepted. In case you're using pharma data, this may not have been always be set up as such. However, they still want you to do it in a clinical evaluation plan, also retrospectively. If you do that, then it's all fine. And then in case you're using preclinical, non-clinical tests for demonstration of certain claims or performances, then please bear in mind that you also have to make the translation towards the clinical setting as well. Again, the sample sizes, and you see quite some focus on the claims, whether they are really justified correctly. And then we move on to the microbiological expert. So related to sterilization documentation, who have been noticing that their remarks are quite general. Often they were already included in a technical dossier, but still they were requesting for the site of the sterilization. And also we just see some general remarks, okay, provide those evidence. Often you could just say, yeah, we have providing it, it's in that document. But yeah, still they were requesting it. It might be, and that might not be directly provided, that you didn't provide all full data, so all raw data. So that might be still needed to be added. I think that is, at least from our experience, and I think that's still a lot. So I'm not sure whether there are any questions. If so, then Emmerich and me are more than happy to answer.
Yeah, exactly. Now is the turn for the question and answers. So feel free to put your question in the chat, and yeah, American Lynn will be happy to answer you.
If you may have a question later on, then it's also well acceptable to send us an email or to contact us via LinkedIn.
We have a question from our friend Tom Manuson, who asked, "What are the do's and the don'ts when communicating with a notified body?"
Yeah, well, I guess you have to keep in mind a little bit that stay professional. Don't treat them too much as friends, because they're not directly your friends. But if you stay professional, then it should be fine. Further, I guess it might be relevant to mention that it's slightly different as if you're talking to a competent authority. I think we're talking to competent authorities is usually more formal, and it's well accepted to have it a little bit less formal with notified bodies. So I think that's good to keep in mind. Further, it's perfectly fine because I also see a little bit of change on that. If you communicate to a competent authority, usually you present your communication as this is our view, and you really represent this is our view. And it's well accepted if you do that a little bit less towards notified bodies, and you can just provide it a little bit as well, this is common practice. So I don't know if Emmerich wants to add something on it.
No, I would say it's quite the same. Then in your just do it, just remember maybe it's like I would say written communication. It's slightly like verbal communication, and always remember to answer to the questions that have been asked and not to provide, I would say, non-expected data. It's like another technique, but yeah, just remind that when you have been asked to provide some document, provide the document, not too much explanation or element like that, that can open doors to new questions, in fact.
Cool. So thanks a lot for the question, Tom. We have another one. Cecilia asked us if we could provide with more information about the preferred conformity assessment route.
Yes, we definitely can. But I also have to address that it's quite specific for the company as well as for the device which you will be making. So I guess the big question is a little bit, should I go for full QMS or should I go for the type examination in combination with the product production quality assurance route? At least that's then a little bit my understanding of the question. The full QMS, I would say, is definitely preferred, but then you also have to set up your full QMS. So you have to have your design and development procedure in place, and you need to follow it. And then it might be a little bit easier to implement the design changes without asking direct permission from the notified body. However, if you say, okay, but I don't want to set up a full QMS, I also don't really need it, then I can do my design and development maybe a little bit quicker. Then it might be that you are going to rely on more the production, and then your production is controlled. But then still, you need to go to the notified body a little bit more in relation to design changes.
Great. So thank you for the question, Cecilia. We have more. Philip asked directly to Emeric, where would you expect to see in the MDR QMS local country requirement registrations, for example, Repertorio in Italy?
Can you just repeat a bit, Fernando? Sorry.
Of course. Sorry, maybe I was a bit fast,
No, no.
Emeric. So basically, where would you expect to see in the MDR or QMS local country requirement registrations? For example,
Yeah.
Repertorio in Italy.
Yeah, I think in fact we all know that this type of information we are going to use it usually not a lot because you are going to perform your very first registration or notification locally. We have two elements. The first one is on a global point of view, not on Italian focus, for example. Always remind that we are going to use more and more UDEMED. So basically, as you will need some information about how to use UDEMED for UDI registration, it could be interesting to have like a global procedure here. Most of the country, France, Belgium, Germany, I know recognizing the UDEMED registration as a local registration or notification. I would integrate, I would say at the end of this procedure, to me, it's a global process. So you have some specific steps to follow for the registration, and UDEMED is just the methods. And sometimes you may have additional or other method to do it. And I would recommend so to have a single procedure integrating some specific requirements. The Italian market required use some additional elements, but it could be interesting to have like a single process that it is UDEMED and integrating into your procedure some specific element. Okay, I make my UDEMED declaration, registration, etc. But Italian market, remember, you need some local operator and I need to do the registration locally. And then if I have one or two specific elements, it could be added just as a sub-process into your big procedure. And I think it could be a nice way to operate because more and more we are going to really focus on UDEMED.
Okay. So thanks a lot for the question, Philip. Enrique made a question, but he had to jump. So we will share with him the answer by email alongside with the slide deck. I am not sure if we have any other question. So does it look like? So I think that we can end in here. Just for your information, we would like to announce in here that we will have another webinar that will be hosted in October the 29th. This time, the topic, as America already mentioned, will be on post-market activity and surveillance. The speakers in here will be Emeric again, and we will have also Keval Bola, sorry, from RNI, and Andrea Larrañaga from Spires, both of them companies of Product Life Group. And we will share more details to you through LinkedIn, so do not hesitate to follow up. Thank you all for attending and wish you a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.